Welcome back. This video is going to do an overview of Chapter 1415 activities. We'll start with part one. So this is on the confidence interval stuff, right? And so we begin by, begin with an exercise where you have to just form a confidence interval and then, think about, okay, what are we doing with this interval, right? Look back at the video assignments. For more information on that. And then part C, this is a bit of an extension where you have to think about, okay, you know, there's a reason we're constructing confidence intervals because we're allowing for some natural variation. So which of these are quote unquote natural variation, right? There are other reasons why there might be a margin of error associated to it. We just can't call it necessarily a confidence interval when we have other sources of error. And then next one, we have to construct confidence intervals. So this is plain Jane, like construct and interpret. Okay, so make sure to read the directions. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then going on, you're doing confidence interval again, following the four-step process. So getting practice with a little bit of writing. And then later on, we have some bonus questions on the same context. So thinking about, okay, so we have some confidence levels. Which one is it? It corresponds to the confidence level. So then what does that mean? Sometimes students get hung up on parts C and D. So about how many measurements. So this is asking you to find a sample size, right? Look back at the videos. There was an example about doing this. So how many measurements do you need, right? And then as you move on, number 4 is talking about getting back to the idea of the central limit theorem. And so thinking about the standard deviation, but then using that to connect to the confidence intervals. Let's see, next one is, again, asking how large of a sample. So that's finding the sample size. And then last one here that is required is asking you about the margin of error. Okay, and I think this one, nope, you can still use Excel with this one. You can do it by hand if you wish. And then there are a couple of optional ones. I'm gonna let you just think about them since they are optional. Looking at the second set of activities, so 1415 part 2, so the Z confidence intervals, right? This one is where you need to, get your hypotheses, do your test statistic, and all that jazz. I should actually mention with confidence intervals, remember part of it was check the conditions. You should always check the conditions as you form a confidence interval, assuming you have enough in the context. If it's already been formed for you, just run with it. All right, number 1. So this one, right, you need to just define the parameter, state the null and alternative. You don't actually have to do any calculations in part 1. Oh, hey, that's easy. Okay. Next one. So this one is getting you to think about what the p-value, right, would say. And then, when we say reject or fail to reject, part of that, and then do the entire conclusion, there's, we have very standard language there, right? But when we ultimately conclude to it, we typically say there was sufficient evidence that this, or there wasn't sufficient evidence that, right? But does that mean that there was literally no difference, or was there no impact, right? So getting you to think a little bit more about that. Okay, number 3, check your notes. Okay, there was a very specific, so this one is trying to connect confidence intervals and, rejecting or failed rejecting the null. There was some information about, making that decision when you had a two-sided alternative hypothesis test. So be sure to check that. Next one, let's see. So again, parameter, null and alternative, and then go ahead and make a little sketch. Sample mean is this. What's the p-value? What do you conclude? And then you go ahead and change. Sample mean changes. What's the impact? And then go ahead and answer those other follow-up questions. Number 5. This is sort of the holy grail of this exercise series. So this is where you have to answer this question. Does it provide good evidence that the mean standardized bone density is less than 0? follow the 4-step process. Do a really nice job of this, and then make sure to hold on to this example. Okay, review the videos as needed. Number 6, this one is actually super relevant for many of you that are entering the health sciences. So you'll commonly hear about false positive, false negative, right? And you need to think about that in terms of type 1 and type 2 error, right? And so that's just an interesting connection. So when we think about false positive, it means this is the type of error that could be occurring versus false negative, right? And you might need to Google that. So the idea false positive is you get a positive test result, which is actually false in reality. So then, which one does that commonly get associated with? Last few exercises are looking at power, right? There's a little bit on power, and then also effect size. So I am intentionally a little vague in the videos about that just because it's a very deep topic and we don't have time to dive deep. But if you need to do a little bit more research, you're certainly welcome to. I'm expecting sort of a very baseline understanding of power. So like what is it? How is it calculated? Okay, we don't necessarily need to go into more depth than that. And then here we have another 4-step process. Yay. And then there are some optional exercises at the end. Okay. With these activities, have fun, and they do take a little bit of work, but again, as I mentioned earlier, this week we're laying the foundation for the rest of the course, so it's really important we get a strong foundation, which is why there's maybe a little bit more writing, a little bit more detail this week. All right, if you have questions, post on the discussion board, email me, and have fun.